views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, good evening. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. You probably know by now, this is BronxNet's program where we talk to writers and reporters and editors and journalists and filmmakers and photographers, anybody who puts something out in and about the borough of the Bronx. We try to incorporate them into the program. And this evening, in our second segment, we have really one of the most exciting up-and-coming Latino musicians who has her third single out, and that's going to be exciting. I'm not going to say her name yet, but a lot of young people especially know exactly who she is. But we're going to start off and do some very serious stuff with our good friend Zach Williams. He's the senior state politics reporter for City and State New York. So we will say good evening to you, Zach Williams. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We always appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day. And I will tell you, I was going to tell you this off camera, but I will tell you, City and State New York, that magazine is such a great publication that I read it cover to cover every week. And even the power list, you find stuff out about people. It's just wonderful. And of course, the journalism is at a very high level. Thank you. Now, how's it? That a good way to start?
That's very flattering. Always knew you were a good man.
That's right. Anyway, let's just get started. You're up there in Albany. You cover politics. We have a new governor out of the blue, so to speak. I guess that's a pun in some form. Tell me a little bit about what the climate is like. Is the tone different in Albany, or really, look, the structures are there? She's the governor, and now we move ahead. What do you think?
Well, in normal times, Gary, this is really the slow season in Albany. You know, they're out of session after June. Usually this is a time when a governor is getting the state budget ready for the upcoming legislative session that begins in January. But this year, everything's different. You know, Governor Andrew Cuomo resigned after a whole litany of scandals. And now Governor Kathy Hochul, as lieutenant governor, has had just about 2 months to really establish herself as the 2022 Democratic race for governor really gets underway. I think she's had some notable successes in her first weeks, notably expediting the distribution of COVID-19 relief funds for tenants and undocumented people across the state, including in the Bronx. And she's also had some pretty good success in kind of inheriting Cuomo's political network, if you were. You've heard of her having fundraisers with people on the political right, like John Catsimatidis. She's been giving a lot of attention as well to the political left. She recruited Brian Benjamin for lieutenant governor, and she's really paid a lot of attention to New York City in particular. You know, there's a lot of voters down there, and they really have an outsized voice in the Democratic Party, especially in places like Brooklyn and the Bronx, where there's a lot of minority voters in particular. So I think, you know, Governor Kathy Hochul has really faced a big challenge. She had to move fast to deal with a whole bunch of problems: Hurricane Ida, speeding up rent relief, so many things. And I think, you know, anyone that really thought that she couldn't handle the job has really got to look at her first 45 days, 2 months in office and say, well, she's really met the tests thus far. That said, Attorney General Tish James might jump in the race anytime, so things can change really quickly in Albany.
Yeah, we're going to get through this November, and then we'll talk about it next spring and November.
So many things going on.
So it sounds like that you believe that things are getting done, whereas with Andrew Cuomo, he would apportion out his time, his own projects, things he cared about, things he could control. And you're saying in this case, she's trying to be the governor for everybody, which is her job, and get a number of things done and, you know, check them off her, you know.
Well, if you need to look at the difference between Cuomo and Hochul, look no further than the rent relief program and the excluded workers fund. Because Cuomo dragged his feet on those issues. He also dragged his feet on appointing board members for the Cannabis Control Board, set up a legal weed market. Those are three things: rent relief, the Excluded Workers Fund, setting up a legal weed market, all these things Cuomo dragged his feet on, and Hochul got straight to work on it because she really wanted to show something tangible in her first 45 years.
And more to come on the environment bill, which people in the Bronx are very interested in. I mean, she got that done.
The environment.
The environment, which we're going to talk about in a second. I just want to ask you what you wrote about it in the sidebar piece. What is the status of a potential impeachment report from the Assembly? Is it one of these things that time will just let it?
Well, we live in perpetual suspense. We live in perpetual suspense. The Assembly impeachment investigation is supposedly wrapping up as we speak. A final report could be released any day. The rumors right now are sometime in October. And that only leaves a week and a half to go. So it could happen any day. I think the expectations are it will largely substantiate what the Attorney General has already found about alleged sexual harassment and a cover-up of COVID-19 in nursing homes, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Is the kind of the impact of it, or the news of it, do you expect that to be heavier towards sexual harassment, which people have already heard the story, or potentially more detail on the nursing home scandal and the fudging of those numbers? Which, when I think about it, I'm like, he was championing that whole thing, and frankly, a lot of people know my mom died of COVID in a nursing home during that early period. And so, I mean, it's a personal thing for me. And then to find out that the numbers were fudged, are you kidding? Anyway, I'm sorry, that was my personal.
You raise a really important point, which is, Tish James did 2 investigations, one about nursing homes. Remember that so many months ago, and then the one about sexual harassment. That's 2, but that's only 2 of a whole litany of scandals that helped bring the governor down. There was also preferential COVID-19 tests for people close to him, like his brother. There was also the book deal and how that might have tied into the nursing home data. And then there's the Mario Cuomo bridge. So the Assembly impeachment report is supposed to touch on these. It sounds like they didn't dig up much about the bridge, but they really could shed some new light on the book issue in particular. How was his multi-million-dollar book deal related to this whole issue with waiting months and months and months to really reveal how many people died in nursing homes?
I want to dispense with that because we'll probably talk about it when it comes out. But you also wrote a very interesting story about the 2021 State Environmental Scorecard. And of course, in the Bronx, the environment is a very big story, which state lawmakers ranked the best in the environment. And in a way, I felt like there weren't any surprises. Democrats, got the 90s. I think Carl Hasty of the Bronx got 90%. I was a little disappointed that the Assembly in the Bronx was at 87%, which was below Queens and Manhattan. But so what do you make of this environmental report as far as how well the state is doing to protect our environment?
I mean, I think this environmental scorecard from the New York League of Conservation Voters should be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt. This rates lawmakers on how much they support the bills this organization supports. That said, they're a widely respected conservation group, and I think what they say about lawmakers says a lot about how much they're in line with environmentalists on some really big issues facing the state. This includes efforts to limit toxic chemicals in water and consumer products, as well as kind of bigger issues like pollution, reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
I'm sorry, I'm smiling because in the Bronx, we're thinking about the peaker plants in the South Bronx. That's numero uno on our list, but go ahead.
Right, and I think a big takeaway is, Democratic lawmakers by and large got like perfect scores or something close to that. But historically, you got to remember environmental issues have typically gotten a lot of support from Republicans as well, but more and more with polarization across the country and in state politics, and you might even say the leftward movement of the Democratic Party, maybe environmental groups too. I thought it was really surprising how few Republicans scored highly on this. You had a few out on Long Island, but that was about it.
Hard not to notice that Democrats were all in the 90s and Republicans, the leaders, some of them were in the 40s. I want to move to one other thing, which sounds like it's not about the Bronx, but when we look at what we had with Yankee Stadium, and I go look at what they're talking about in Tampa, what they're talking about in Las Vegas. You did a little work on the Buffalo Bills stadium. The notion, and this is again sensitive to the Bronx, how much money do you put into public money? Do you put into the creation of a stadium, and then what do you get back for that investment? Of course, with the Yankees, we're still talking about that in the Bronx. What's happening up in Buffalo?
Well, I won't. In Buffalo, the state, the Buffalo Bills, and the county government are negotiating how much public support the Buffalo Bills will get for a new stadium. Now, obviously, the Bills are loved in upstate New York, and especially in their hometown of Buffalo, whether or not you call that upstate or not. But I will say that, what it really echoes is what we've seen across the country, including in the Bronx with the Yankees and elsewhere, which is, localities are willing to spend hundreds of millions, if not more money, to keep teams, from moving to other places. And, one interesting thing about the Buffalo Bills, though, is people are not arguing the economic benefits so much. That's kind of refreshing, just because we've seen in city after city, local officials argue, well, you got to spend money because the economic benefits of a professional sports team are just too important. Nah, study after study after study. This goes back down.
You
don't pay for themselves.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir in the Bronx.
Yeah, So, A, for honesty, I guess, out there in Western New York and with the governor saying we just love the Bills too darn much, and the economic benefits are secondary, if not non-existent in the grand scheme of things. But, here we go again. They're still going to spend millions and millions of dollars. The only question is how much it might be to keep the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo, no matter what economic cost it brings to taxpayers across the state.
Yeah, and these owners, they know it, and they just like George Steinbrenner was threatened to go to New Jersey. In Tampa, they're talking about playing half their games in Montreal for the Tampa Bay Rays.
It's an emotional attachment. You can't imagine the Yankees outside the Bronx, and you can't imagine the Bills right now outside of Buffalo. But we need to realize these are emotional investments, not economic development investments.
Zach Williams, we have an emotional attachment to city and state New York. We're tied at the hip. We love when you come on, and when all your colleagues. I think Jeff Colton is going to be on our other program, Bronx Talk, next week to talk about the elections. We're going to keep turning to you because you're great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great. There you go. Zach Williams, senior state politics reporter for city and state New York. We're going to take a short break and then a really cool segment with a really hot Bronx musician. She is making it happen.